Hey everyone, welcome to Greco Makes. My name is Grace. Today I'm going to be taking you through a step-by-step sew-along tutorial to make this tote bag. If you haven't purchased the pattern already, the link is in my description and it will take you to my Etsy shop where you can buy the pattern. The pattern includes two size options, so there's a large size and a small size. And both sizes include a pocket on the outside and a pocket on the inside with a zipper. The strap of this tote bag converts from one long strap that can be put over your shoulder into two shorter handles. And you can adjust the length of the strap by retying this knot in the straps wherever you'd like. Today, I'm going to be walking you through making the large size, but the steps are exactly the same if you want to make the small size, so you can choose whichever you prefer and follow along. All of the fabric requirements and details about notions you'll need for this pattern are included in the instruction book, so refer to those if you haven't already gathered your materials. All right, and without further ado, let's start sewing. Okay, so I've already followed the pattern and cut up my fabric. I'm going to be using this quilting cotton for the lining. Sorry, I chose a color that was like exactly the same as my cutting mat. Hopefully you can still see it all right. And then for the outside of the bag, the outer fabric, I'm going to use this denim. It's got a really obvious right side and wrong side, so hopefully that'll be helpful for this tutorial. Okay, so the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install some snaps. So here's a bag that I've already finished, and you can see that we have some snaps here on the bag opening. These are totally optional. You can use either plastic, which is what I'm going to use, or those magnetic bag snaps. Either is fine, but also leaving it out completely is totally fine. The second place that we can put a snap is here in the front pocket. So on this small version, I've put a snap in this front pocket. On this large version, I didn't put a snap there because I put this seam of stitching down the center to kind of split this pocket into two smaller pockets. I felt that would be more useful. So totally up to you whether you want to have a big pocket with a snap, or if you want to have two smaller pockets and leave the snap out. Okay, so for the bag opening snap, I'm going to take these two body facing pieces and I'm just going to follow the instructions from the snaps that I have to install those. I'm just going to follow the pattern placement, so I've marked these dots when I cut out my fabric, and I'm just going to install my snaps there. Make sure that when you're installing your snaps, you're putting the right side of the snap on the right side of the fabric, and you don't put your snap on upside down. Okay, up next, we're going to prepare the outer pocket. So you're going to need the outer pocket lining, the outer pocket facing, and then the outer pocket piece out of your main fabric. So we'll start with the facing and the lining, and we'll put those right sides together along the straight edge of the facing and then the top edge, so the narrower edge of the lining. And then we'll just take this to our machine and we're going to sew along that edge with a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so here we've sewn the outer pocket facing to the outer pocket lining with right sides together. And then I also went ahead and pressed the seams towards the lining like this. This is totally a matter of personal preference. I am going to top stitch along the lining here, but if you prefer, you can also press the seam allowance towards the facing and you can top stitch along there. So now I'm going to go and just sew a line of top stitching, so 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch or 3 to 6 millimeters away from this edge, and I'm going to do it on the lining. Next, we're going to put this lining outer pocket piece right sides together with the main fabric outer pocket piece. That we can line up those notches in the center, and we're just going to put some pins in. Here we go. And now we are just going to sew these two together along this top curved edge with our 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so these two pieces are now attached. Next, you're gonna take your scissors and we're just gonna put some little clips in this edge, and that's just gonna help it lie flat once we turn it right side out. So just take your scissors and every, I don't know, centimeter and a half or so, we're just gonna put a little clip in, and just make sure your clips aren't going through any of the stitches. So you want them to be through most of the seam allowance, but not all of it, because otherwise you will clip your stitches. Okay, there we go. And now we can take this to our ironing board and we're going to press it right sides out. So we'll take it like this, and then we're just gonna press this all flat. Okay, so to make it easier to iron, I will usually go kind of along the seam and just press it open a bit. You can also generally just do like a bit of a finger press here, I find. So just pull them open and kind of press with your fingers. You also could maybe have done a bit of a press before we cut it, but oh well. Like this. If you've put a snap here, and specifically if it's a plastic snap, just be careful not to touch it with your iron because it will melt. Okay, just before I do the top stitching, I also added this little patch. I just took a scrap out of my fabric scraps bin because I thought it would look cute, like my own little label. I didn't turn the edges under because I kind of like this little like frayed look, but you could also turn the edges under or put the little patch somewhere else. But I always think that's a cute little detail on my things that I make, to put my own little patch. So I did that, and that is just through the outer layer, not through the lining as well. So up to you if you want to add that little detail. Okay, now we're going to do the top stitching along here. Okay, so now we've done the top stitch. That was through both layers there. And I used this extra strength sort of top stitching thread just because I like the way it looks on the thick denim. You can kind of see it a bit better, but you can totally just use whatever thread you want or have on hand. Okay, the next thing to do is you're gonna take that finished outer pocket and line it up on top of the outer body. If you did put a snap there, make sure that you grab the outer body piece that you put the snap on and not the other one. And then I'll just go ahead and put a couple pins in to keep everything in place. There we go. Everything's lining up pretty well. Don't worry too much if things don't line up perfectly. You can always just do a little bit of a trim to even things out. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna mark down the center line, and then we're gonna sew here so that we split this big pocket into two. So if you're only making one pocket, like you added a snap here, or you only want one pocket, then you can just skip this step. But if you're going to split your pocket in half, then you're gonna grab a ruler and some sort of marking tool. So I'm gonna use one of these tracing wheels, but you could use chalk or whatever you prefer, just something that will come off because we are gonna mark on the right side. So now I'm gonna line up my ruler. I have a notch in the center at the top and then notch in the center at the bottom. If you didn't mark your center lines, you could also fold this in half like this and just make a little clip at the center to mark it. And then I'm going to take my tracing wheel and I am going to just mark a line down the center. And I only needs to be down the center of the pocket. It doesn't need to be up here. Now I'm just going to take this to my machine and I'm going to sew, again with my top stitching thread, I'm going to sew down this line. Okay, there we go. So we've sewn down the center there. If you did the snap, the single pocket construction, you can join back in here. I'm gonna just put some clips around the outside just to make sure that my edges stay nicely together. And now I'm just gonna baste this outer pocket to my outer body. So by baste, I mean I'm gonna sew along the edges and I'm gonna sew less than 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch away from the edge because we want these stitches to be inside the seam allowance so that they're not shown when we sew the whole body together. So I'm gonna use the longest stitch setting on my machine and I'm just gonna sew around the edges, keeping pretty close to the edge. Okay, so I've done those stitches in white. You can see they're quite long. So they're just to hold these two pieces together to make them easier to work with later. So I'm done with these pins. And then I'm just gonna give this a little bit of a trim. You can see that these edges don't quite line up perfect. It's really not a big deal, but I will just come in and give them just a little bit of a trim, and down here as well. Okay, there we go. So outer pocket is finished. Next, we're gonna work on the interior zipper pocket. So here's my pocket bag. This is the wrong side of the pocket bag. Sorry, it's very similar in color to my cutting mat, but hopefully you can see it okay. I've already marked this zipper opening rectangle. The pattern piece for the pocket bag has that rectangle marked, so you can follow that. Or in your instructions, it also gives some measurements for placements of this rectangle. And you're gonna mark it on the wrong side. Okay, then I'm gonna take the lining body piece and I'm gonna line up the top edges of the pocket bag with the top edge of the lining body. And the top edge of the lining body is the narrower end. So make sure you don't have it upside down. Narrower edge up. With the right sides together, you're gonna match the center notches on the pocket bag and on the lining body, and you're just gonna line them up like that. I'll put a couple of pins in to keep it in place. There you go. Now we're gonna take this to our machine and we're just gonna sew around this rectangle. So the whole perimeter of the rectangle. You don't wanna sew down the center line that you marked, and you don't wanna sew on those little triangles, just the rectangle. Okay, so now you're gonna take the pocket bag and you're gonna put it through the opening that you just cut. And now we just wanna press that opening nice and flat. I find if you turn it so that you're looking at the right side of the pocket bag and then flip it so that you can see these seams, and then you press those open. I find this really helps to press the pocket bag flat. Okay, so now you're gonna take your zipper. If your zipper is already 20 centimeters, then it will line up with the edges of the pocket bag here. Mine's a bit longer than 20 centimeters, so it's going to extend past like this, but that's okay. We'll just clean it up, trim off the ends when we're done. So from the right side, you're gonna line up the zipper in the zipper opening. You can use some tape if that helps you keep this in place. You can use pins. If you really want to get bonus credit and do it properly, you can hand baste the zipper in place, but I'm just gonna put a couple pins. This is on the inside of my bag, so I'm not super worried about it looking as clean as possible. Okay, so now I'm gonna take this to my machine and I'm gonna top stitch the zipper in place from the right side. What I like to do when I'm sewing a zipper into a opening like this, you're gonna have to move the zipper pull at some point. So what I do is I start with it fully closed at the far end. And then I'm gonna start with I might have to take out this pin. I'm gonna start with my needle just in front of that. So like as close to it as I can be, but being in front of it, like here maybe. And then I will sew all the way around to that side. Then I'll move the zipper out of the way. And it just makes it so that the most amount of zipper is sewn in place and not gonna move on me when I have to move that zipper pull. If you're using a metal or a plastic zipper, make sure you use the hand wheel as you go over the zipper teeth here. My zipper is nylon, so I feel comfortable sewing through it. But if you're worried, just use the hand wheel so that you don't break your needle. Okay, so now I've gotten back to this end, and here's where I'll lift my presser foot, and then I will move the zipper out of the way. Okay, there we go. So we've sewn our zipper in place. You could probably get closer to the edge if you used a zipper foot, but for my purposes, again, I think this is a zipper that's going on the inside of a bag. No one's gonna really see it. I'm comfortable with this, but if you want it to be cleaner, you could use a zipper foot as well. So now I'm gonna turn this over, and if either of the ends are extending, I'm gonna just trim them off. So we want to just trim the zipper so that it's the same width as the pocket bag. Now I'm going to fold this pocket bag in half like this. And I'll put some clips down the side. Now I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to sew down these sides. And I only want to be sewing through these pocket bag layers and not through the body layer. There we go. So the sides of the pocket bag are closed. This top is still open. So the last thing I'm gonna do is just use our basting stitch again and sew along the top to close this pocket bag and just make this piece easier to work with. You can also skip this step if you feel comfortable working with this open. We are just gonna sew a straight seam across there to add the facing after, but if you'd like to, we can put in a line of basting stitch. So again, that's your longest stitch length on your machine, and you're gonna do it less than 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch away from the edge, so super close to the edge. Okay, now I'll take this to my iron and I'll just give the pocket bag a press. If your zipper teeth are plastic, make sure you don't touch them with your iron because they will melt. Okay, so now we're gonna take that lining body piece with the pocket that you just constructed, and then also the other lining body piece, and you're gonna grab the two body facing pieces. You may have installed snaps on them earlier, or you may have not have. Either way, grab those pieces. You're gonna put the body facing piece on top of the lining body piece with right sides together. And you can line up those center notches again. And then we're gonna repeat the same thing for the other lining body. Next, we'll take that to our machine and we'll just sew along this top edge with our 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now we press the seam allowance towards the lining. Again, if you have a plastic zipper here, Don't touch the zipper with your iron because it will melt. And also, if you have a plastic snap here, as I have, don't touch that with your iron because it will also probably melt. If you have a plastic zipper and a plastic snap and you find this difficult to press because you can't really get in there with your iron, don't worry about it too much. You can give it like a finger press and then we'll top stitch it so it won't be too big of a deal. Okay, so now take these pieces to your machine and we're going to sew a line of top stitching right along the lining. Hello, just popping in here to let you know that I made a change to this pattern since I made this tutorial. It shouldn't mess you up too much, but I just wanted to make it really clear that in this tutorial, the outer bottom and the lining bottom piece are each one long piece. But in the pattern as it is right now, I cut those pattern pieces in two and you have to sew them together at the bottom. So here on this bag, there's no bottom seam because when I made this whole side and bottom was one piece. But now there will be a seam across the bottom right here. And I just did that so that that pattern piece is easier to work with. It's not super long. It's not as hard to cut that long piece of fabric on a regular size table. And also it helps save fabric if we want to cut that pattern piece with the vertical grain of the fabric. Okay, so before we keep going, we just have one extra quick step to do and then we'll get back to the tutorial. So take those two outer bottom pieces, put them right sides together, and then you're gonna sew them together along the short end. Press that seam open, and now that piece should look exactly like the long outer body piece that you'll see later in the tutorial. Next, you're gonna take the two lining bottom pieces and you're gonna put those right sides together and then sew them together along the short end with the double notches. If you didn't mark any of the notches or dots that were on the pattern piece, then it doesn't really matter. Sew them together along one short end or the other. If you did mark the double notches and the dots, then make sure you sew them together along the side with the double notches. Otherwise, those dots will be in the wrong place with respect to that seam. And lastly, press that seam open as well. And now your lining bottom piece should look exactly like the long lining bottom piece that's gonna be in the next step, but you'll have that seam down the middle. And everything else from here on out is exactly the same. Okay, back to the tutorial. Okay, so for the next step, I'm gonna sew these side facing pieces to my inner bottom. So this long rectangle piece here. And these side facing pieces is gonna go one at each end. So I'm gonna pin them at the same time and then sew them back to back and you'll see how that looks. So we will line up these center notches here on the short sides. Now I'm gonna sew down each end. I'm gonna sew with our 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now we're gonna press the seams towards the lining. Now we're gonna top stitch right along the lining here. Okay, so next up we're gonna construct the outer body. So we're gonna take these outer body pieces and we're gonna sew them to the outer bottom. So this long one in our main fabric. So take the outer bottom piece and you're going to lie it on top of the outer body piece with right sides together. So you're gonna start at the top where the straps will go and just line them up and then line up this whole right edge like that. There's a notch halfway down so you can make sure that that lines up. And then we'll put some clips, hold that in place. Okay, now there was a dot on the pattern piece And if you marked that dot already on the wrong side of your fabric, then you're good to go. But if you haven't marked that dot yet, I'm just going to show you how you can figure out where that needs to go, and you can mark it at this point. So you're going to be marking a dot that's going to be along this seam allowance. So it needs to be 1 centimeter away from the edge of the outer bottom piece. So it's going to be down here. And you're going to mark it 1 centimeter above the end of this body piece. So that body piece, I know it's under there, you can't really see it, but you can kind of feel where it is. And you're going to mark a dot that is so like there. So just in case you can't see that, it is 1 centimeter away from the edge here, and then 1 centimeter away from this bottom. Okay, now you're gonna take that to your machine and you're gonna sew all the way down this edge, and you're gonna stop with the needle down on top of that dot. Okay, I'm getting close to the dot here, so I'm just gonna slow down. And okay, so you're gonna stop with your needle down on the dot. I'm gonna take this off the machine now and show you where you need to make a little clip. If you can get in there with your scissors, you don't have to take this off the machine, and I would actually recommend that you don't take it off the machine, but I will do it just to show you. So I'm gonna backstitch a bit. So here we are, we've sewn right to the dot, and now I want to make a little clip only in the outer bottom piece. So the outer bottom pattern piece, confusingly, that's the piece of fabric that you have on top right now. But as they're labeled in the pattern, the outer bottom piece, and you want to make a little snip right to that dot, just like this. Now I'm gonna go and put this back on the machine. Okay, and now I'm back at the point where I have my needle on the dot, and I've done that little clip. With the presser foot, with the needle down and the presser foot up, I'm gonna rotate this 90 degrees like this. And then because of that little clip that we made, we can now turn the outer bottom piece around the corner of the outer body. So like that. And now these are gonna line up. You can make sure that the center notches line up. And then you're gonna put the presser foot down and just keep sewing. Okay, so as I get close to the end here, I'm gonna stop again. And if you have your dot marked, you're good to go. You can just keep sewing right until that dot. But if you don't have your dot marked, you can mark it right now. So I'm gonna grab my marker again. And it's the same thing. So I want to mark a dot that is right along where that stitching will go. So it's 1 centimeter away from this edge. And then it's also 1 centimeter before this edge. So I'm going to feel where that is. And I think it's about right there. So I'm going to mark that. Now I'm just going to keep sewing to that dot. And I'm gonna stop with the needle down. Now I'm gonna show you how to do this without taking the fabric off the machine. So with the needle down, you can kind of turn it a bit and just wiggle your scissors in there, make a little snip. And again, that snip is only going through this piece of fabric, not the whole body piece of fabric. Now I'm gonna turn 90 degrees again. Do that little turn at the corner, put my presser foot down, make sure this side lines up properly, and now I'm gonna sew this side. So I ended up a little bit short on this end. I'm not sure why, maybe I didn't do my corner super well, but it's not a big deal. We can just snip that off and even amount on both sides. This is not a huge deal. So don't stress if one of these edges is longer than the other. We can fix that later. So here's what we have now. We have this bottom attached to the body, and if you turn it right sides out, you can see that you get these nice sharp corners, which is exactly what we want. So now I'm just going to press these seams open. Okay, now we're going to follow the exact same method to just attach the other outer body piece to our outer bottom here. So same as before, we're going to line up the right side, matching that notch in the center. We're going to mark our dot, so 1 centimeter away from the right edge, 1 centimeter above this bottom. And we're going to take this to our machine and we'll sew all the way here and we'll stop at the dot. And things lined up much better on that side, so that's great. And we'll just take this to our iron and press these seams open as well. Okay, so now we finished the inner body, and I made a critical mistake, but it's not a big deal and we can fix it. And just in case you make the same mistake, you want to make sure that you leave a gap on one of these sides. It doesn't really matter which, but we need to leave a 10 to 15 centimeter gap so that we can turn the bag right side out, which I forgot to do. I sewed these shut. So I'm going to take my seam ripper and I'm just going to open up a little hole on one of these sides. Okay, there we go. So now we have a little hole that's open, and we could take this to the machine and do a little back stitch on either side so that it doesn't come undone more if you would like. The smarter way to do this would have been as we're sewing this seam here, once we got to the bottom, it would stop and then leave a gap and pick up again here and then keep sewing so that we had a gap. But this is just to show you that it's not a big deal if you forget to do that. You can just rip a little hole open. Okay, next we're going to take our strap loop pieces and our strap pieces to the ironing board and we're going to press them. So for the strap loops, you're going to fold it in half the long way and press. And this just creases the center line. Then we open. And now that center line is creased so that you can press the two other long edges into the center. And now we fold the whole thing in half and press. Now you'll take those to your machine and you'll just top stitch down each side. So for the strap, the pressing is the same, except for the first step. At the start, you're going to turn under one of the short ends by 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. And then everything is the same. So from there, we're gonna press in half Then you'll open, but leave this end folded under. And then we'll turn the long ends to the center. I find this easier if you just do one side at a time. And then you'll fold the whole thing in half. Again, this end that you folded under at the start stays tucked under so that that end of the strap is finished. And then I'll put some clips down this one just to hold it in place while I top stitch. So now for the strap, I have one end that is not folded under here, and then one end that is nicely folded. When I do my top stitching, I'm going to start from this unfinished end, and I'm going to sew all the way up one side, get to the end, we'll go across, and then back down the other side to here. When you get to the short end, you'll just turn and sew across the end and then back down the other side. Next, grab your outer body and we're going to attach the straps. So for the straps, you'll take the unfinished end and you'll sew them to the front of the bag, and the front is where the pocket is, obviously. You want the strap to be sewn onto the outer body piece as opposed to onto the bottom or the side of the bag. And you want the outer edge of the strap to be in line with this seam here. So just like that. So it basically looks like the strap is centered across this whole opening. We'll repeat on the other side. So the outer edge of the strap lines up with that seam, and the strap is centered in that opening. We'll flip the bag over and take our strap loops and fold them in half. And then we'll do the same thing. So the outer edges should be aligned with that seam. And now we'll just use our basting stitch to attach the straps and the strap loops to the bag. So sewing really close to the edge, less than 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch away. And you might want to sew across a couple times just to make sure they're nice and secure. If you've used a thick fabric like I have, then these strap loops are going to be quite thick when they're folded in half. So I recommend using the hand wheel only across these, just so that you don't break your needle. Okay, now that the straps and the strap loops are attached, grab both your outer body and your inner body. You want your outer body to be right side out, and you want your inner body to be inside out. You're going to put the outer body inside the inner body and make sure that you note which side you're putting this zip pocket on. So I tend to like the zip pocket being on against the front of the bag because I find it easier to access when I'm wearing the bag. But if you preferred it to be on the back, you can totally do that as well. Just notice which side you're putting it on as you put this together. So I'm going to take my outer body and I'm going to put it inside of my inner body. And now I'm just going to line up all of the seams and notches around the whole top edge. Next, you're going to sew around this entire top edge. When you sew through the strap loops especially, and maybe also the straps depending on the thickness of your fabric and the strength of your machine, you're going to want to use that hand wheel again. Don't try and sew over these strap loops normally because they will likely be too thick and your machine will not like it, unless you have a really heavy duty machine, in which case, lucky you. So we'll take this to our machine and we'll just sew around the whole top edge. Okay, now like we did with the outer pocket, we're just gonna make clips in all of the curved seam allowances, and that will help it all lay flat when we turn the bag right side out. And then we're also gonna trim the corners of the seam allowances around the straps and strap loops. Okay, now we're gonna turn the bag right side out through that hole that you left in the bottom. I like to take something like a chopstick and we can use it to help turn out the corners of these straps. Okay, now we'll take this to our ironing board and we'll just press this whole top edge flat. Okay, next we're gonna sew a line of top stitching around that whole top edge. And again, you're gonna use the hand wheel over top of the strap loops if your machine isn't happy with the thickness. Okay, the last thing to do before we're done is just to close the gap in the lining. So you're gonna pull the lining out of your bag and find the gap. If you want a really clean finish, you could blind stitch this closed by hand, but I'm not too worried about it being super clean since it's at the bottom of my bag and no one, including myself, is probably ever going to see it. So you just fold under the seam allowance and then line up the edges. I have some extra threads because I ripped out this seam before where I forgot to leave the hole, so we'll clip those up after. But now we'll take this to our machine and we'll just sew a line of top stitching really close to the edge along the gap. Okay, we're basically done. So we just take your straps and we're gonna feed them through the strap loops. And we'll tie a knot.